Tina Cassidy, it is so great to see you. I think of
You
you as a
too,
part of
Carol.
our team, and we miss you. You've gone off to become this big book writer and TV personality. We saw you on the PBS, wonderful PBS story, The Vote, that documentary. Talk to us a little bit about how all of that came about and your, really incisive commenting throughout the programming.
Well, thank you, Carol. It's delightful to be here, and I appreciate all the work that the ERA Coalition is doing. So the vote came about through WGBH's production unit, American Experience, and they had been looking at how to tell the story of a centennial of women voting that happened in 1920. And, it started a couple years ago where they really started to dig in and think about how to commemorate such an important occasion. I was lucky enough to be a part of that film, having written a book called Mr. President, How Long Must We Wait? And it's about the struggle between Alice Paul, who led the movement for the 19th Amendment, and Woodrow Wilson, who was the president who opposed ratification of that amendment. Of course, Alice Paul also wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, so we love her for that reason as well.
We love her for that. We love her for
Yes.
that. And thank you for the segment on the ERA. That's a part of that series, which brings it up to date. In rereading parts of your book, I again was startled to realize that Alice Paul, after all of the work that she had done to get the voting rights for women, was not there at the signing. Tell us, about her, quote, bad behavior that excluded her.
Yes. Well, so Alice Paul put Woodrow Wilson on warning that she was going to make a federal amendment for voting rights her primary focus. And she did that by having a parade, a suffrage parade the day before his inauguration. And then she continued to harass him regularly by showing up at the Oval Office and picketing in front of the White House and burning his words in Lafayette Square. And so he didn't like her, and neither did any of the other members of the Wilson administration.
I wonder why.
Right? Exactly, right. So, it's that saying, well-behaved women never make history. So people didn't like her, and so when the 19th Amendment was finally ratified and the Secretary of State signed that document, he specifically excluded Alice Paul. She was literally standing outside of his office, knocking on the door, and he wouldn't let her in. He did, however, have an official signing with the good suffragists, the ones who were much more polite and didn't harass the president and had only ever been asking for state-level voting rights for women. And so when you look at that picture of that historic moment, Alice Paul is excluded. She had even hired, photographers for that day and someone to record it on video. But she instead brought them over to Cameron House, which was her suffrage headquarters, and recorded the moment there. You see that famous photograph of her unfurling the suffrage flag. So she made the most of that day.
She made the most of it. Yeah, I was startled when I saw the PBS series that you actually had video, as we call it now. You actually had film.
It's moving pictures then.
Right, moving pictures of Alice Paul. So,
yes. Yeah, there's so much beautiful cinematography in that. The archival photographs and films, very cool to see. It really brings it to life in that movie.
So we're about to celebrate Women's Equality Day, which is August 26th, the day that Tennessee ratified the ERA. I keep, ERA on the brain. The day that Tennessee ratified the
One
voting.
day, Carol.
I know.
That day is coming soon.
We're hoping soon, right? 2021, we're going to get the ERA. But Tennessee ratified the Voting Act, and then they only needed 36 states. Lucky them. Talk to us about that. What, that momentous time of getting a final state. We know what we've been through of getting the 38 for the ERA, but in that time, 36, and Tennessee was the crossover state.
Tennessee was the crossover state. It almost didn't happen, of course. It came down to one vote by one man in the Tennessee legislature, Harry Byrne, whose mother wrote him a letter that morning and said, "Be a good boy." and vote for suffrage, and he did. They had to go through the count a couple times because first it sounded like he voted no, and then he voted yes. But you know, one interesting thing for me is when you look at the map and you look at the states originally that were staunchly against the 19th Amendment, mostly southern states. It is the same states today that have not voted for the Equal Rights Amendment. So there's such incredible parallels between the mindset, the culture, if you will, and the geography of our you know, unwillingness to move the agenda forward for women.
Right. So we're also approaching an election in this country, and now that women can vote, all women can vote theoretically. What are you thinking about the impact of what Alice Paul and the suffragists did, what they created, and how that could actually be unified to make a huge impact in this election?
Well, I feel like every social movement builds upon, you know, itself. And so Alice Paul and that movement for the 19th Amendment really laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement laid the groundwork for where we are today, if you want to call it third wave feminism. I'm really hoping that that people who absorb what happened a century ago, what women had to go through to earn the right, all the women who were disenfranchised after being given that right, all the people who today still struggle with access to the ballot or who feel like their vote doesn't matter because of, you know, gerrymandering or redistricting, that they feel inspired by that to get out to vote, because it's up to us now that we have these rights to use them. And I do think that we've seen in the last 4 years a sort of awakening around protest movements and people, especially women, finding their voice, especially women of color. And I am feeling some momentum in that direction. So I am hopeful. But, you know, not until we have more than 50% of the people voting in all elections. I mean, we should have a goal of 100% people voting in all elections, up and down the ballot, not just in a presidential year. You know, then I think we will have really achieved something.
Yeah, recently I gave a talk at Chautauqua where Martha Jones, who's done so much of the work about women of color, Black women in the voting rights movement, as well as the equal rights movement, someone asked me, what would you say to Alice Paul? I mean, she's such a dominant figure in both the voting and the 19th Amendment and what we hope will be the 28th Amendment. I don't know. I said we would pat her on the shoulder and say, Alice, you know, we're making progress. We're going to get there with the ERA, and people are beginning to use, you know, to the full extent what you did for the Voting Rights Act. Some other people have faulted her for her lack of understanding of coalitions in both movements. Mm-hmm. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You're absolutely right that Alice Paul was single-minded, and she really thought about one movement, and that was a gender movement, a gender-based movement. It was about women. It was not ever about race, and she couldn't wrap her head around how those things intersected. And now we have this term intersectionality, which is meant to address that sort of thing, right? It didn't exist then. Right. You know, you can fault her for being politically expedient. You can fault her for being single-minded. And yet, she did pass the 19th Amendment. It was her idea. She was the leader of that movement. And she knew, literally the day after the 19th Amendment passed, she got to work on the Equal Rights Amendment and thinking about the fact that women having voting rights wasn't enough, that the Constitution did not address issues of inequality for women, and that needed to be addressed. And so for me, thinking about the fact that this woman wrote the Equal Rights Amendment almost a century ago as well, she was really prescient. She really saw the future about what needed to happen. And while she was fighting for the ERA for so long, and while we continue to do so today, she was able to pass hundreds of pieces of legislation addressing inequality in Congress. And she dedicated her whole life to that and was very single-minded about that. So, you know, she may have been flawed in some regards, but that single-mindedness also helped her be that person to stay focused for the long term. And so, you know, it's really interesting to think about that. You know, she understood that we needed a constitutional amendment to address equality, and I feel like we kind of owe her that, just as we owe her, you know, we owe her voting. We need to get out there and vote because of what she did, and we need to find a way to address constitutional equality as well.
Yeah,
and that's what you're doing, Carol. Every day.
No, and thank you for all of your help in getting us this far. We do consider you a part of our efforts. And in reading the epilogue of your book, though, I've always to know that Ridgefield, Connecticut, where Alice Paul lived in the later part of her life, was the town over from where I lived, you know, for many years, and in Westchester. And I had no idea that she was there or what she had done or accomplished. And the end of her life is so, tell us about that. I mean, she had a long life, but anonymous.
It ends quite sadly. You know, she had no children, and you know, was, as I said, her life was dedicated to the cause. And so as she got older, you know, she never had any other job besides being an activist. She relied on donations and the help of others. And so as she got older in years, you know, she ended up in a nursing home in New Jersey, quite penniless. They had to pass a hat to get her some clothes. And it's a very sad ending for a woman who did so much for our country. But, you know, what's interesting is that she never really wanted the attention for herself. She didn't care about that. It was never about that. And so it's almost as if she was okay to sort of blend into the background at the end. Her legacy stands for itself. But I do think that we need to honor her, you know, at this moment during the centennial, and as we consider passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. You know, what did she sacrifice? Really everything at the end of her life. I don't think she would have been sad about it. Yeah, I don't think she would have been sad about it, but it is what it is.
Wow. Well, quite a story, and you tell it so well in your book, Tina. Congratulations.
Thank you, Carol.
And thanks for talking with us today. We hope to see you in real life at some point soon.
That would be really nice.
Great. Love to your family. Thanks, Tina.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.